The scent of grilled peaches and chlorine hung in the humid air, a perfect symphony of summer. Sarah smiled, a genuine, unfurrowed smile that reached her eyes, crinkling the corners just so. This was her dream. Not just the party, but the entire existence it represented. After years of hard work, saving every penny, and countless weekends of DIY landscaping, her backyard truly was an oasis. The rectangular pool, shimmering aquamarine under the relentless July sun, was the crown jewel, surrounded by lush potted plants, tasteful string lights, and a new outdoor kitchen that still smelled faintly of fresh cedar. Today was the culmination. Her first real pool party, a housewarming, and a celebration of a decade of grinding. Her carefully curated guest list trickled in, a handful of close friends from her marketing firm, a couple of older, quieter neighbors she'd grown fond of, and her sister Chloe, who arrived bearing a vibrant fruit salad and her signature cheeky grin. The atmosphere was light, filled with easy chatter and the gentle clinking of ice in glasses. Kids, belonging to friends who'd brought them, splashed playfully in the shallow end, their joyful shrieks contained and melodic, not piercing. Sarah walked among her guests, refilling drinks, pointing out the new features of her yard, basking in the glow of approval and the warmth of genuine connection. She felt, for the first time in a long time, truly at peace. Then, the calm shattered. It wasn't just a car pulling up, it was a vehicular assault. A battered minivan, its once white paint job faded to a sickly yellow, screeched to a halt at the curb, its tires spitting gravel. The doors on both sides burst open simultaneously, and a cacophony of high-pitched shouts erupted. From the driver's side emerged Karen. Karen. The name alone was a sigh, a groan, a tightening in Sarah's stomach. Karen lived 3 houses down, and their interactions, though infrequent, had always been memorable. From the unsolicited advice on her lawn care, "You know, that patch of fescue is really going to stand out against the Bermuda deer," to the mysterious disappearance of her recycling bin every Tuesday morning, Karen was a force. A self-appointed neighborhood matriarch who saw every communal space, every shared moment, as an invitation to assert her unique brand of aggressive helpfulness. Sarah had deliberately not invited her. "Sarah, darling," Karen's voice, a gravelly mezzo-soprano, cut through the party's gentle hum. She was already halfway up the driveway, a triumphant smile plastered on her face, like a general surveying newly conquered territory. Behind her, like a chaotic legion, spilled at least 5 children, ranging in age from what looked like a toddler barely out of diapers to a preteen with a sneer permanently etched onto his face. Sarah swallowed, the grilled peach suddenly tasting. Like ash, Chloe, noticing Sarah's stiff posture, sidled up to her. "Uh-oh, incoming Karen missile, and a whole arsenal of smaller, equally destructive mini-missiles." "I didn't invite her," Sarah whispered, her voice tight. "She doesn't need an invitation, sweetie," Chloe deadpanned. "She is the invitation." Before Sarah could formulate a plan, Karen was upon them, arms outstretched. "Sarah, oh, what a wonderful surprise! We were just driving by, and I heard the music and thought, my goodness, Sarah's finally throwing a proper summer bash. So I brought the gang." She gestured grandly at the children, who were already fanning out, their eyes wide with predatory delight at the sight of the gleaming pool. Sarah forced a smile. "Karen, it's lovely to see you. We're just having a small get-together, really." She tried to sound breezy, unconcerned, but her pulse hammered in her ears. "Nonsense." Karen waved a dismissive hand. "The more the merrier, I always say. And the kids desperately needed to burn off some energy. They've been cooped up all day." This was followed by a sharp, piercing shriek from the toddler, who had somehow already located a half-eaten hot dog on a plate and was attempting to cram the entire thing into his mouth. "Mommy, can we swim? Can we? Can we?" A girl with tangled, Blonde hair demanded, already pulling at her t-shirt. Of course, darling. Go on, Karen beamed, as if she had just granted them access to a public park, not a private residence. Sarah's eyes darted from Karen to the children. She saw the glint in their eyes, the unrestrained energy, the complete lack of inhibition. These were not the well-behaved, supervised children she was accustomed to. She took a deep breath. Karen, actually, I don't have extra towels or swimsuits for them, and the pool can get a bit crowded. Karen chuckled, a sound like gravel rolling in a tin can. Oh, don't you fret, dear. We're always prepared. My little darlings have their swimsuits right under their clothes, don't you, angels? She beamed at them. And towels, please. A little drip-drying never hurt anyone. And besides, your pool looks absolutely enormous. Plenty of room for a few more, right? Before Sarah could formulate another polite refusal, the children had already begun stripping off their outer layers. The older boy, the one with the sneer, did a running dive, a poorly executed cannonball that sent a tidal wave over the meticulously arranged chaise lounges and drenched Sarah's friend, David, who was mid-sip of his artisanal iced tea. David spluttered, a look of shocked indignity on his face. "Excuse me?" he called out, wiping his face with a napkin. The boy merely surfaced, shook his head like a wet dog, and grinned. Karen, instead of reprimanding him, laughed. Oh, that's just little Tyler. Such a strong swimmer. Sarah felt a vein throb in her temple. This was going to be a long afternoon. She tried to herd the smaller children away from the deeper end, explaining the rules about not running, not splashing too vigorously. Her words seemed to dissipate in the summer air, unheard, unheeded. The toddler, now free of the hot dog, had found the ice chest and was systematically pulling out handfuls of ice and tossing them onto the lawn. Another child, a girl with fiery red hair, was attempting to climb the inflatable flamingo float, clearly too big for her, and was rapidly deflating it with her frantic clawing. "Sweetie, please be careful with that float," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice even. "It's quite delicate." The girl ignored her, grunting with effort. Karen materialized beside Sarah, holding a plate laden with sliders. "Oh, let them have their fun, Sarah. Kids are just kids, you know. They need to explore." She took a large bite of a slider, sauce dribbling down her chin. These are delicious. Did you make them yourself?" Sarah felt a surge of indignation. "Yes, I did. And my friend's children are managing to have fun without destroying anything." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, you're just too uptight, dear. Relax. It's a party." The chaos escalated. The children had discovered the diving board, a simple springy plank at the deep end. Tyler, the cannonball king, was now attempting increasingly elaborate dives, each one sending a bigger, colder wave over the edge of the pool. Sarah's carefully placed potted hydrangeas were taking a beating. The smaller kids, emboldened by their older siblings' antics, began a game of tag that involved chasing each other around the wet concrete, a slip-and-fall accident waiting to happen. "Hey guys, please, no running on the concrete," Sarah called out, her voice rising in pitch. "It's really dangerous." One of the smaller boys, no older than 7, skidded to a halt, then deliberately turned and slid the rest of the way on his knees, laughing maniacally. Karen, who had now found a lounge chair and was scrolling through her phone, merely glanced up. "Oh, he's fine, Sarah, just being a boy." Sarah felt her teeth clench. This wasn't a party anymore, it was an invasion. Her friends were starting to look uncomfortable. David had retreated to the far corner of the patio, nursing a fresh, non-splashed iced tea. Chloe kept shooting Sarah sympathetic glances, occasionally intercepting a runaway child before they could trample a flower bed. The food table became the next casualty. A younger child, perhaps 5, had climbed onto a patio chair and was now systematically picking up every single potato chip from the large bowl, licking each one, and then placing it back. Sarah watched in horror, frozen for a moment. "Excuse me," she finally managed, striding towards the table. "What are you doing?" The child looked up, startled, his face covered in chip crumbs. "I'm making them yummy," he declared, holding up a half-licked chip. "Put that down immediately," Sarah snapped, her patience finally fraying. Karen, alerted by the raised voices, ambled over. "Oh, look at little Timmy, always so creative. What's the fuss, Sarah?" "He's licking all the chips and putting them back," Sarah practically hissed, gesturing at the now unappetizing bowl. Karen peered at the bowl, then back at her son. "Oh, is that all? Well, he's sharing his flavors. So generous, Timmy." She then turned to Sarah, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "You know, Sarah, sometimes you just need to let go. Not everything has to be so pristine. Life's messy." She patted Sarah's arm, a gesture Sarah found utterly condescending. Sarah pulled her arm away. "Messy is one thing, Karen. Unsanitary and disrespectful is another." Karen's smile tightened, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Well, I never. My children are not disrespectful. They're just energetic." She scooped up a handful of the licked chips. "See? Perfectly fine. You worry too much." She popped one into her mouth. Sarah stared, aghast. Suddenly, a terrified scream ripped through the air. Everyone froze. It was Chloe's son, Leo, who was 10. He had been playing quietly in the shallow end, building a floating Lego fort. Tyler, the older boy, had just performed a truly monstrous belly flow. Karen's face, usually set in that practiced saccharine smile, contorted into something genuinely ugly. Her cheeks, normally ruddy, paled around her rapidly reddening nose, and her eyes, glittering with menace, seemed to shrink to pinpricks. You shut off the pool?" she stammered, as if the words themselves were foreign, unthinkable. Her voice, moments ago a gravelly murmur, began to climb, gaining volume and a dangerous tremor. "Are you out of your mind, Sarah? My children are in there. They could drown." Sarah stood her ground, unmoved by Karen's theatrical outrage. The sudden silence that had descended on the backyard felt both shocking and profoundly satisfying. The smaller children, previously oblivious, now started to realize the fun had stopped. The toddler, Timmy, who had been licking chips, now whimpered at the sudden lack of noise. Tyler, still waist-deep in the stagnant water, looked less like a strong swimmer and more like a confused, bedraggled creature caught in a sudden drought. "They are perfectly capable of standing up, Karen," Sarah stated, her voice still calm, a stark contrast to Karen's rising hysteria. "The water is barely 5 feet deep at its deepest point, and most of them are in the shallow end. They are not in danger of drowning. What they were in danger of, however, was hurting themselves and my guests with their unsupervised behavior." "Unsupervised?" Karen shrieked, her voice now piercing. "I am right here! I am their mother! How dare you accuse me of being an irresponsible parent? And how dare you, on your own property, treat guests this way?" She stomped a foot, a surprising thud on. The wet patio? The motion sent a fine spray of chlorinated water from her damp clothes onto the perfectly grilled peaches. Sarah's gaze flickered to the ruined fruit, then back to Karen's furious face. "My guests, Karen, are the people I invited. You arrived, uninvited, brought children who have systematically disrupted my party, damaged my property, and, just moments ago, physically injured another child. My patience is exhausted. The pool is closed. You and your children need to leave. Now." The quiet murmurs from Sarah's actual guests intensified. David, who had been drenched, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval. Chloe, still, holding a sniffling Leo, looked at Sarah with a mixture of awe and relief. The sheer audacity of Sarah's move and her unwavering composure in the face of Karen's meltdown seemed to galvanize a quiet support among her friends. Karen's children, finally realizing the party was truly over, began to react. The smaller ones started to cry, cold and bewildered. Tyler, the sneering preteen, scowled even harder, his bravado crumbling. "Mom, she can't do that. We were just having fun," he whined, scrambling out of the pool, water streaming from his hair and board shorts. "Oh, she can do that, Tyler, and she is doing that," Karen snarled, turning her fury on her son for a brief second before redirecting it back to Sarah. "And it's utterly disgraceful. My children are traumatized. They've been looking forward to this all day." "They have been looking forward to a party. They weren't invited to, Karen," Sarah countered, her voice unwavering. "And if they are traumatized, it is because of your complete lack of supervision and your refusal to teach them basic respect for other people's property." This hit a nerve. Karen's face flushed an even deeper crimson. "How dare you lecture me on parenting, Sarah? You don't have children. What do you know about it? You're just a selfish, childless career woman who cares more about her stupid plants than about human beings." The words were spat out, laced with a venom Sarah hadn't anticipated. Collective gasp went through Sarah's guests. Chloe stepped forward, her own expression hardening. "Karen, that's completely out of line. Sarah is a wonderful person, and she has every right to ask you to leave. You crashed her party and let your kids run wild. Look what Tyler did to Leo." Chloe pulled Leo closer, gently wiping his still trickling nose with a fresh napkin. Karen ignored Chloe, her eyes fixed on Sarah, burning with righteous indignation. "You think you're so high and mighty, don't you? With your fancy new house and your immaculate lawn? Well, let me tell you something, dear. This neighborhood isn't just for your kind. Some of us have families. Some of us have lives that aren't spent polishing porcelain and pruning hydrangeas." "My life is my business, Karen," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a dangerous low. "And my property is my own. And right now, my business is asking you to get your family out of my backyard." The older male friend, Mark, a burly man who rarely spoke, stepped up beside Sarah. His presence, tall and solid, was a silent but powerful endorsement. David, too, moved slightly closer. The unspoken message was clear. Sarah was not alone. Karen, seeing the unified front, wavered for a fraction of a second. Her tirade momentarily stalled. Her eyes darted between Sarah's impassive face and the stern expressions of her friends. Her children, meanwhile, were finally clambering out of the pool, shivering slightly in the now silent air, their earlier exuberance replaced by confusion and the beginnings of genuine misery. One of the smaller girls started to cry loudly, a theatrical wail. "Mommy, I'm cold. I want to go home," she wailed, clutching Karen's leg. Karen, forced to acknowledge her children's discomfort, finally started to pivot. "Fine, fine. If this is how you treat your neighbors, Sarah, then we'll leave. But don't you come crying to me when you need a cup of sugar or when your cat gets stuck in a tree." She gathered her soggy brood, her movements stiff with indignation. Tyler, still sulking, made sure to stomp a wet footprint directly onto Sarah's pristine patio furniture cushion as he passed. "Tyler!" Sarah snapped, but he ignored her, following his mother. Karen herded her children towards the gate, muttering, curses under her breath. One of the smaller boys, the one who had licked the chips, made eye contact with Sarah as he passed, and with a mischievous grin, purposefully kicked over a small decorative bird bath, sending water and ceramic shards. Scattering across the lawn, this was the final straw. Sarah's composure, maintained with such effort, finally cracked. "Karen, get your children under control. You are responsible for their actions." Karen spun around, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare tell me how to raise my children. And don't you think for a second that this is over, Sarah. This is a neighborhood, not your private kingdom. You'll regret this. You'll regret treating good people like this." With that parting shot, she ushered her crying, shivering children out through the side gate and slammed it shut with a resounding thud that echoed through the now eerily quiet backyard. Silence. A heavy, thick silence, broken only by the distant chirp of cicadas and Leo's soft sniffles. Sarah stood by the silent, still pool, her chest heaving slightly. The air felt charged, heavy with the residue of conflict. Her friends looked at her, some with concern, some with admiration. Chloe was the first to speak. "Sarah, are you okay? That was something else." She squeezed Sarah's arm. Leo, his tears slowing, looked up at Sarah with wide, innocent eyes. Sarah let out a shaky breath. I'm fine, I think. I couldn't take it anymore. She had no right." "No, she didn't," David said, stepping closer. "Good for you, Sarah. Seriously, someone needed to put her in her place. She pulls this stuff all the time." Mark nodded in agreement. "Karen's always been a terror. You did what needed to be done." Despite the support, a cold dread began to settle in Sarah's stomach. Karen's parting words, her threat, replayed in her mind. "You'll regret this." What exactly did that mean? Karen was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who thrived on drama and perceived slights. Sarah knew deep down that this wouldn't be the end of it. This was just the opening salvo in what promised to be a protracted neighborhood war. The party, predictably, had lost its festive spirit. The sun still shone, the peaches still smelled sweet, but an undeniable pall had fallen. Sarah's friends, though supportive, looked uncomfortable, glancing around at the lingering evidence of Karen's children. The shattered bird bath, the licked chips, the deflated flamingo float bobbing mournfully in the motionless water. "I'm so sorry, guys," Sarah said, gesturing vaguely at the disarray. "I guess the party's pretty much over, isn't it?" "Don't be silly, Sarah," Chloe said, trying to inject some cheer. "It's just a little interlude. We can still salvage it, right?" But even as she spoke, the reality was clear. The magic was gone. Guests began to make their excuses, polite farewells tinged with lingering awkwardness. "We should probably get Leo home," Chloe murmured, patting Sarah's arm. "Are you sure you're okay?" "Yeah, I'll be fine," Sarah said, forcing a brave smile. "Just need to clean up." Soon, Sarah was alone in her backyard, surrounded by the remnants of what should have been a perfect day. Empty glasses, half-eaten plates of food, and the glaring evidence of the invasion. The broken bird bath, the deflated flamingo, the licked chips, and the still, silent pool, its surface reflecting the setting sun like a glass eye, a stark monument to her act of defiance. She knelt beside the shattered ceramic of the bird bath, picking up a sharp shard. The anger was still there, a hot ember, in her chest, but it was now laced with a growing anxiety. What would Karen do? Karen was known for her passive-aggressive tactics, her subtle campaigns of attrition. Sarah had heard stories from other neighbors, mysteriously misplaced mail, sudden complaints to the HOA about minor infractions, anonymous flyers left on cars. Karen wouldn't forget this. She wouldn't forgive. The words seared into Sarah's vision, glowing faintly under the street lamp's sickly orange glow. "Sarah is a bitch." A primitive roar caught in her throat, a sound she hadn't known she possessed. Her hand, still tracing the jagged lines on her mailbox, clenched into a fist. It wasn't just the insult. It was the violation, the deliberate petty cruelty. Tyler, a child barely old enough to control his own impulses, acting as a proxy for his mother's simmering rage. This wasn't a skirmish. It was an act of war. She snatched her phone from her pocket, her fingers fumbling with the screen. Her first instinct was to call the police. But what would she say? "My neighbor's kid scratched a swear word on my mailbox?" It felt trivial, yet the venom behind it was anything but. Besides, involving the authorities would only escalate the situation into a formal complaint, a protracted, soul-sucking process she dreaded. No, this was a neighborhood issue, and Karen had just drawn the battle lines. Her thumb hovered over Chloe's contact. Chloe would understand. Chloe would be furious. On her behalf. But then what? Chloe lived across town. This was Sarah's fight, right here, on her property line. She stepped back, breathing deeply, trying to rein in the raw anger that threatened to consume her. She took a photo of the vandalized mailbox, the flash stark against the etched words. Then another, closer shot, hoping to capture the distinct pattern of the scratches, though she knew it was futile. There was no real proof it was Tyler, beyond her eyewitness account, and Karen would deny it vehemently. A cold, steely resolve began to replace the initial shock and fury. Karen wanted a war? Fine. Sarah had always prided herself on being rational, on avoiding conflict. But Karen had crossed a line, a deeply personal one. This wasn't just about a pool party anymore. This was about respect, about boundaries, about proving that her meticulously built haven would not be trampled underfoot. The next morning, Sarah woke with a clear head and a plan. The scrawled insult on her mailbox stared back at her as she collected her newspaper. She didn't bother to cover it. Let the neighborhood see it. Let them know Karen's true colors. Her first call was to a local hardware store, arranging for a security camera installation. It was an expense she hadn't planned, but now it felt essential. Karen might operate in the shadows, but Sarah would. Shed light on every one of her moves. Her second call was to a local landscaping company, not to repair the birdbath yet, but to inquire about the cost of a 6-foot privacy fence along the property line she shared with Karen. The previous owners had a low, decorative fence, but Sarah now craved an impenetrable barrier, a physical manifestation of the boundary Karen refused to acknowledge. Throughout the day, Sarah noticed things. The usually friendly waves from passing neighbors were now hesitant, their glances darting from her to Karen's house. She saw Mrs. Henderson, a sweet elderly lady from 2 doors down, quickly pull her curtains shut when Sarah caught her eye. The neighborhood, it seemed, had already picked up on the shift in atmosphere. Karen's influence was already at work. If on cue, a flyer appeared on Sarah's windshield when she returned home from work. It was neatly folded, almost innocently placed. She unfolded it, her stomach tightening. It was from the Homeowners Association, a notice about maintaining aesthetic standards and adhering to community guidelines regarding excessive noise and property upkeep. It didn't mention her by name, but the timing was too perfect, the wording too pointed. Sarah's heart sank. This was Karen's modus operandi, passive-aggressive bureaucratic warfare. She had already weaponized the HOA. That evening, Chloe came over, a bottle of wine in hand. She gasped when she saw the mailbox. "Oh, Sarah, that little demon! And Karen, that's just despicable!" Sarah recounted the HOA notice. "She's starting, Chloe. She's already playing dirty. HOA complaints, vandalism." Chloe poured them both generous glasses of wine. "Well, you knew she wouldn't just roll over. Karen lives for this kind of drama. But what are you going to do?" Sarah took a slow sip. "I'm not backing down. I called about security cameras and a privacy fence. I'm going to make this place a fortress." Chloe nodded, a grim determination on her face. "Good. Don't let her win. But she's going to keep pushing. You need to be prepared for anything." The next few days were a tense standoff. Sarah avoided eye contact with Karen. Karen, in turn, made a point of ostentatiously watering her lawn at the exact moment Sarah was leaving for work, turning her back dramatically and humming off-key, petty but effective in establishing the animosity. The security camera installation provided a small sense of empowerment. She now had eyes on her property, a digital witness to any future transgressions. The fence quote, however, was astronomical, far more than she could afford right now. The thought of being trapped in a cold war with Karen, unable to fully protect her space, gnawed at her. Then the rumors started. Sarah heard them first from a casual conversation at the grocery store. Mrs. Henderson, the curtain-pulling neighbor, cornered her in the produce aisle. Her voice hushed. "Sarah, dear, I just wanted to say, I heard what happened, about the party, and the mail." She wrung her hands. "Karen's been talking, saying things, about how you're a danger to children and that your pool isn't properly maintained. She even suggested to the neighborhood watch that you might be unstable." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Unstable? She's telling people I'm unstable?" Mrs. Henderson nodded, her eyes wide with alarm. "She's very convincing, dear, especially since you shut off the pool like that. Some people, they just see the surface, you know. They don't know Karen like we do. The accusation of being a danger to children was particularly insidious. It was a direct attack on her character, designed to isolate her within the community. Karen wasn't just fighting a property dispute, she was launching a smear campaign." Sarah returned home, the benign anger she had felt slowly solidifying into a cold, hard resolve. Karen hadn't just vandalized her property, she was attempting to vandalize her reputation. This was personal. This was war. That evening, Sarah spent hours online, researching neighborhood laws, HOA bylaws, and, most importantly, Karen's own online footprint. It was a long shot, but Sarah was a marketer by trade. She knew how to dig for information, how to build a profile, how to find vulnerabilities. She discovered Karen's seemingly innocuous neighborhood Facebook group, Our Caring Community. Sarah had dismissed it as a forum for bake sale announcements and lost pet notices. But as she scrolled through Karen's posts, a pattern emerged. Karen frequently posted about minor infractions, anonymously of course, but with enough detail that regular members of the group could often deduce the target. And then she would subtly manipulate the comments, stirring up indignation, building a consensus against the perceived offender. It was masterful, a slow, public crucifixion. Sarah clicked on Karen's personal profile. It was mostly pictures of her children, overly enthusiastic posts about their achievements, and saccharine memes about motherhood. But then Sarah noticed something else. Karen had a separate, private Facebook group, Neighborhood Watch Inner Circle. This group was closed by invitation only. A dark, uncomfortable premonition settled over Sarah. This was where Karen plotted. She sent a request to join, knowing full well Karen would never approve it. But as she clicked, she noticed a single, fleeting detail. One of the group's listed members was Mrs. Henderson. Sarah leaned back in her chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. Mrs. Henderson, sweet, well-meaning Mrs. Henderson, was a part of Karen's inner circle. And Mrs. Henderson had just told Sarah that Karen was spreading rumors about her. The next morning, Sarah baked a fresh batch of her famous lemon poppy seed muffins. She knew Mrs. Henderson loved them. Bearing the warm muffins, she walked over to Mrs. Henderson's house, a casual, friendly smile on her face. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson. I was just baking and thought of you. Thought you might enjoy these." Sarah held out the plate. Mrs. Henderson's eyes lit up. "Oh, Sarah, you're too kind. Come in, come in." Inside, the scent of fresh coffee filled the air. Sarah sat at Mrs. Henderson's kitchen table, making polite conversation, listening to the older woman talk about her prize-winning petunias. Then, casually, Sarah brought up the neighborhood gossip. "It's just so disheartening, Mrs. Henderson." Sarah sighed, shaking her head. "To hear that someone in the neighborhood is spreading such vicious lies. Especially after everything with Karen's kids at the party. It makes me wonder who I can really trust." She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "I mean, people say the most awful things about others, even in private groups. You know, like the Neighborhood Watch, Inner Circle group Karen runs. I tried to join, but she wouldn't let me in. It makes me wonder what she's saying about me." "In there." Mrs. Henderson froze, her teacup halfway to her lips. Her eyes, which had been so kind, now widened in alarm. A faint blush crept up her neck. She knew. Sarah had hit a nerve. "Oh, that group," Mrs. Henderson stammered, avoiding Sarah's. It's just neighborhood stuff. Nothing much, dear." "Really?" Sarah asked, her voice innocent, almost naive. "Because Karen seems to be using it to spread quite a lot of neighborhood stuff about me. Things that are completely untrue, and frankly damaging to my reputation. I'm sure you, as a member, would agree that such malicious gossip has no place in a caring community." The screenshots arrived that night, a steady stream of damning evidence landing in Sarah's inbox. Mrs. Henderson, true to her word, had diligently captured every malicious post from Karen's Neighborhood Watch Inner Circle Facebook group. Sarah scrolled through them, her blood chilling. There it was, Karen insinuating Sarah's pool was a health hazard due to questionable chemical levels. Karen suggesting Sarah's loud parties were disturbing the peace and attracting undesirable elements. And most insidious of all, Karen's veiled warnings about Sarah's erratic behavior and unsuitability for residential living, often followed by comments from other clearly manipulated neighbors echoing her concerns. The accusations of being unstable and a danger to children were plain as day. A slow, deliberate plan began to form in Sarah's mind. She wasn't going to engage in a petty online spat. Karen had chosen the battleground of public opinion, and Sarah, a master of strategic communication, would leverage it. She needed to expose Karen, not just to a few neighbors but to the entire community, and in a way that left no room for doubt or denial. The next day, Sarah walked into the monthly HOA meeting, a USB drive discreetly tucked into her purse. The meeting hall, usually sparsely attended, was buzzing. Karen, radiating an air of self-importance, was already there, holding court at a table, whispering conspiratorially with Mrs. Davies, the stern-faced HOA president. Sarah felt eyes on her as she entered, a mix of curiosity and discomfort. The rumors, it seemed, had spread far and wide. Sarah took a seat near the back, observing. The meeting proceeded as usual. Discussions about landscaping budgets, common area maintenance, and the upcoming block party. Karen, predictably, raised her hand during the new business section. "Mrs. Davies, if I may," Karen began, her voice dripping with false concern. "I'd like to bring up a pressing issue regarding neighborhood safety and standards. There have been concerns recently about certain properties that seem to be, shall we say, neglecting their civic duties. We've had reports of excessive noise, property disarray, and even, regrettably, behavior that could be seen as a threat to our children's well-being." She paused, casting a pointed glance at Sarah, her smile thin and knowing. "I believe it's imperative that the HOA take a firm stance. We need to ensure all residents adhere to the community guidelines, especially concerning the proper maintenance of private amenities, such as swimming pools, to prevent any unforeseen incidents." A few heads nodded. Mrs. Davies looked serious, jotting notes. It was a classic Karen move. Generalize the complaint, make it sound like it came from reports, and subtly point the finger without direct accusation. It was designed to provoke a preemptive strike against Sarah, using the HOA as her weapon. Sarah raised her hand. Mrs. Davies, looking surprised, acknowledged her. "Yes, Ms. Jensen?" Sarah stood, her posture straight, her voice clear and calm. "Thank you, Mrs. Davies. I appreciate Mrs. Thompson bringing up the topic of neighborhood safety and adherence to community guidelines. In fact, I have some information that I believe is highly relevant to this discussion, particularly regarding maintaining a respectful and truthful community environment." Karen's head snapped towards Sarah, her eyes narrowing. A flicker of unease crossed her face. "Over the past few days," Sarah continued, addressing the room, "I've been the target of a rather insidious smear campaign. False rumors have been spread about my property, my character, and even my sanity. These rumors, I believe, are designed to incite fear and animosity within our otherwise peaceful community. She held up the USB drive. I have here, on this drive, irrefutable evidence of who is behind this campaign and the methods they are using. This evidence comes directly from a private online group purportedly dedicated to Neighborhood Watch, but which, in reality, is being used to disseminate malicious gossip and personal attacks against me. A hush fell over the room. Karen's face went pale. Mrs. Davies looked intrigued, a flicker of professional concern in her eyes. I'd like to present these screenshots to the board and to anyone present who wishes to see them, Sarah stated, her voice gaining strength. They clearly show the deliberate fabrication of lies, the manipulation of other residents, and the clear intent to damage my reputation within this community. Karen jumped to her feet, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. This is outrageous. You have no right to present personal online communications. This is an invasion of privacy. It's slander. Her voice was shrill, breaking the silence. Slander, Mrs. Thompson, Sarah retorted, her eyes fixed on Karen's panicked face, is the act of making false and damaging statements. What I am presenting are your false and damaging statements, made publicly within a private group that involves other members of this community. And as for invasion of privacy, I would argue that publicly defaming a neighbor and vandalizing their property far outweighs any perceived breach of privacy on my part. She turned back to Mrs. Davies. I have photos of my vandalized mailbox as well, Mrs. Davies, with a crude, offensive message, carved by a minor, yet clearly orchestrated by an adult. I believe this evidence, coupled with the online campaign, paints a very clear picture of harassment and malicious intent. Mrs. Davies, a woman who valued order and procedure above all else, held up a hand. Mrs. Thompson, please take your seat. Ms. Jensen, do you have these documents ready to be projected or distributed? Yes, Mrs. Davies, Sarah replied, a subtle hint of triumph in her voice. I have them on this drive. I can project them now or provide copies for the board's review. Karen was sputtering, her face a blotchy red. You can't. This is private. This is character assassination. It is simply the truth, Karen, Sarah said, her voice like ice. And the truth, unlike your carefully crafted lies, does not fear the light. Mrs. Davies, sensing the gravity of the situation and the clear breach of community decorum, made a decision. Given the serious nature of these allegations, Ms. Jensen, I think it would be prudent to review these immediately. If you could, please connect your drive to the projector. A collective gasp went through the room as Sarah handed the USB drive to an HOA volunteer. The volunteer, curious, quickly connected it to the large projector screen at the front of the room. The first screenshot filled the screen, a post from Karen, disguised as a concerned citizen, questioning the unusual amount of chlorine smell emanating from a certain new pool, and subtly linking it to potential health risks for neighborhood children. Karen gasped, then stared at Mrs. Henderson, who sat pale and rigid in her seat, avoiding Karen's furious gaze. The volunteer scrolled to the next screenshot, another post from Karen, this time discussing a recent incident of disturbing behavior involving a new resident and a group of innocent children, insinuating that Sarah was volatile and unfit to live in the community. Comments from other neighbors, clearly responding to Karen's prompting, agreed, expressing concern. The murmurs in the room grew louder, turning into shocked whispers. Faces turned from the screen to Karen, then back to the screen, a dawning, realization spreading. This wasn't just idle gossip. This was a deliberate, targeted attack. Karen stammered, trying to regain control. These are taken out of context. This is edited. She's trying to frame me. Are they, Karen? Sarah's voice was calm, cutting through Karen's increasingly frantic protests. Perhaps the HOA board would like to personally verify these posts by requesting access to your Neighborhood Watch Inner Circle group. I'm sure Mrs. Henderson as a member could corroborate their authenticity." Mrs. Henderson, cornered, gave a small, defeated nod. Karen's eyes widened, a look of pure, unadulterated shock spreading across her face. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Her own trusted lieutenant had turned against her. The next screenshot was displayed. The photo of Sarah's vandalized. Mailbox. Sarah is a bitch, starkly visible. The crude scratching, unmistakable. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. The visual evidence, combined with the online campaign, was irrefutable. The whispers turned to outright indignation. People who had been swayed by Karen's subtle campaign now saw her for what she was, a petty, malicious bully. Mrs. Davies, her face grim, removed her reading glasses. She looked at Karen, her expression one of profound disappointment. "Mrs. Thompson, these allegations are extremely serious. Deliberately spreading false and defamatory information and encouraging the vandalism of a neighbor's property are not only against community guidelines, but could also constitute grounds for legal action." Karen, defeated, sank back into her chair, her face ash-gray. Her usual bravado had completely evaporated. She looked cornered, trapped, her entire carefully constructed web of influence unraveling before her eyes. The power she had wielded through manipulation and veiled threats was now exposed, transparent and ugly, for the entire community to see. The meeting erupted into a flurry of angry murmurs and condemnations directed at Karen. No one was looking at Sarah with suspicion anymore. Instead, their gazes held a mixture of apology and quiet respect. Karen, unable to bear the public humiliation, suddenly scrambled from her seat. "This is ridiculous! I won't stand for this!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. She pushed past the rows of chairs, ignoring the stairs, and fled the meeting hall, the double doors swinging shut behind her with a dramatic bang. The silence Karen left in her wake was not the tense, suffocating silence of fear, but a palpable sigh of relief that rippled through the HOA meeting hall. Faces turned to Sarah, no longer with suspicion, but with a mixture of apology and quiet respect. Neighbors who had previously averted their gaze now offered tentative smiles, some even nodding in silent solidarity. The truth, as Sarah had declared, had indeed shone its unforgiving light. Mrs. Davies, the HOA president, approached Sarah after the meeting concluded. Her demeanor was no longer just professional, it held a touch of genuine regret. "Ms. Jensen," she began, her voice low, "I want to personally apologize for the distress Mrs. Thompson has caused. We had no idea the extent of her activities." She gestured vaguely at the projector screen, which still displayed Karen's insidious posts. "The board will be convening an emergency session tonight. Given the nature of the evidence, particularly the vandalism and the documented harassment, we will be issuing Mrs. Thompson a formal warning, followed by significant fines if there are any further incidents. We will also recommend a cease and desist order, and if necessary, support any legal action you choose to pursue." Sarah nodded, a quiet sense of vindication settling over her. "Thank you, Mrs. Davies. I appreciate that. All I ever wanted was to feel safe and respected in my own home." As Sarah walked out of the meeting, several neighbors stopped her, offering their support. David and Mark, who had been at the pool party, shook her hand firmly. "You handled that perfectly, Sarah," David said. "That woman needed to be stopped years ago." Mrs. Henderson, looking deeply contrite, approached her. "Sarah, I am so sorry. I should have spoken up sooner. I was just intimidated by her." Tears welled in her eyes. Sarah softened. "It's okay, Mrs. Henderson. You did the right thing by helping me. That took courage." She understood the power of Karen's manipulation, how she could make even well-meaning people complicit. The immediate aftermath was a strange calm. Karen's minivan, previously a constant presence, was rarely seen. Her children, once loud and ubiquitous, seemed to vanish from the neighborhood streets. The aggressive helpfulness, the unsolicited advice, the pervasive aura of self-importance, all gone. It was as if a noxious weed had been pulled from the garden, leaving behind an unexpected quiet. Sarah's first priority was her mailbox. The security camera installation had been completed the day before the HOA meeting, a silent sentinel watching over her property. She called a professional, and within days, the mailbox was restored to its pristine white, the ugly words erased, a testament to her reclaiming her space. She also contacted the landscaping company again. The privacy fence, once an unaffordable luxury, now felt like a necessary barrier, a symbol of her renewed sense of security. Construction began the following week, the rhythmic pounding of hammers, a comforting sound, building not just a fence but a wall against future intrusions. But the tangible changes were only part of it. The real shift was in the neighborhood's perception. The whispers continued, but now they were about Karen, not Sarah. Children who had previously played with Tyler and his siblings now kept their distance. Birthday party invitations that Karen's children had once received seemed to dry up. The social fabric of the community, once subtly controlled by Karen's influence, began to reweave itself, with Sarah, the new resident, now seen as a quiet heroine who had dared to stand up to the bully. A few weeks later, Sarah hosted another small gathering. It wasn't a grand party, just a casual barbecue with Chloe, David, Mark, and even Mrs. Henderson, who had become a regular, if still slightly timid, visitor. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow on the sparkling pool, now fully operational, its pump humming contentedly. The new privacy fence, though not yet fully grown in with climbing vines, stood tall and imposing, a peaceful backdrop. Leo, Chloe's son, was splashing happily in the shallow end, his nose fully healed, his laughter echoing freely, unrestrained by fear. "It feels different," Chloe observed, sipping her wine, her gaze sweeping over the serene backyard. "Peaceful, like you finally got your oasis back." Sarah smiled, a genuine deep smile. "It does. It really does." The anxiety that had plagued her, the dread of Karen's next move, had slowly dissipated, replaced by a quiet confidence. She had fought for her home, for her peace, and she had won. The HOA, true to its word, had hit Karen with a substantial fine for the malicious online campaign and the property damage. More importantly, they had issued a formal notice detailing the community's zero-tolerance policy for harassment and defamation. The message was clear: Karen was on thin ice. Karen's children, particularly Tyler, began to experience the ripple effects of their mother's actions. Tyler, once the ringleader of the pool invasion, found himself increasingly ostracized at school. Word had spread, not just from the HOA meeting, but from the hushed conversations of parents who were now wary of the Thompson family. His usual group of friends started to exclude him from playdates, reluctant to bring him to their homes for fear of trouble, or to go to his. The confident sneer that had once been permanently etched on his face slowly morphed into a more sullen, defeated expression. He became quieter, more withdrawn, a shadow of his former boisterous self. The freedom his mother had championed had become a cage of social isolation. One warm afternoon, as Sarah was watering her newly planted rose bushes near the front of her house, she saw the minivan. It was pulling away from Karen's house, not with the usual screech of tires, but slowly, deliberately. It was loaded, packed to the brim with boxes, furniture tied precariously to the roof rack. Tyler was in the passenger seat, his face pressed against the window, looking out with a vacant stare. Karen was driving, her hair pulled back tightly, her face devoid of its usual bluster, replaced by a weary resignation. Sarah froze, the watering can suspended in midair. She watched silently as the minivan paused at the end of the driveway, then turned right, away from the familiar route to the main street, heading down a less traveled road that led out of the neighborhood towards the highway. It was clear. Karen and her family were moving. They didn't wave. They didn't glance back. They simply drove away, leaving behind a sudden, empty silence where their chaotic presence had once been. Sarah stood there for a long moment watching the minivan disappear in the distance until it was nothing more than a faint shimmer on the horizon. There was no triumphant feeling, no surge of victorious glee, just a quiet, profound sense of an ending. Karen had sown chaos and division, and in the end, the seeds of her own actions had forced her out. The neighborhood, once her stage for manipulation, had become her prison of shame. Later that evening, Chloe called. "Guess what I just heard?" she chirped, barely containing her excitement. "Mrs. Henderson just texted me. Karen Thompson's house has a for sale sign. Out front! And the minivan was packed up this afternoon." Sarah chuckled, a genuine, relieved sound. "Yeah, I saw them leave. Can you believe it?" Chloe exclaimed. "She actually left, after all that. It's karma, Sarah, pure and simple. You won." Sarah looked out at her backyard, bathed in the soft glow of her string lights. The pool shimmered invitingly, a symbol of peace reclaimed. The new fence stood tall. The air was clean, clear, and quiet. "I didn't win, Chloe," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. "I just stood my ground, and sometimes that's enough." She walked to the edge of the pool, dipping her hand into the cool, crystal-clear water. The surface was still undisturbed, reflecting the gentle glow of the moon. Her oasis was finally, truly her own again. The peace she had sought, fought for, and nearly lost had returned, deeper and more precious than before. The neighborhood, having witnessed her unwavering stand, now looked to her not with suspicion, but with a quiet respect, a testament to the power of one person's refusal to back down in the face of chaos.